The light above me was so white it almost looked holy. Everything in that room shimmered. The stainless steel trays, the slow blink of the heart monitor, the clear tubing of the IV that fed into my arm. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, steady but scared. The anesthesiologist leaned close and said, "Deep breaths, Ms. Brooks." I was seconds away from closing my eyes when I heard running feet and a child's voice, high and desperate. "Grandma, stop, please, don't do it." The room froze. A nurse gasped. My doctor turned. And there, standing in the doorway in his little hospital slippers, was my grandson, Malik, his face red, tears streaking down his cheeks. "Grandma," he sobbed, "Dad said you're not supposed to wake up after this. He said everything gonna be ours when you gone." The world tilted. For a moment, I didn't know if the beeping I heard was the monitor or my own heart breaking. I remember thinking, that can't be right. My boy would never say something like that. Not Darius. Not the child I carried through storms and fed when I had nothing but faith and fried cornbread left. The doctors shouted orders. "Get that child out. We'll hold anesthesia." And the edges of the room wavered like heat on asphalt. I tried to lift my hand, but it felt like lifting a brick underwater. Malik's voice echoed, smaller now, drowned in adult panic. Then darkness rolled over me, soft and heavy. When I woke again, everything was quiet except the slow beep of machines. My throat hurt. My mouth tasted like metal. For a long moment, I didn't know if the surgery had happened or not. Then I saw the IV still running clear, untouched. No bandages on my side, no pain where there should have been pain. And in that quiet, the truth started knocking. Slow, heavy knocks that shook my bones. My name is Evelyn Brooks, and I was ready to die that morning. Not because I wanted to, but because that's what love looks like when you're a mother who's done giving excuses. I'm 68 years old, born in Macon, Georgia, raised on hymns, hard work, and the idea that family comes before breath itself. My husband, Charles, passed when Darius was only 8, leaving me a house with peeling paint, a mortgage I could barely manage, and a boy who looked too much like his daddy for me to ever be angry at him for long. People say mothers should learn to let go, but they never tell you how to let go of guilt. I worked 35 years as a nurse's aide, scrubbing floors and lifting bodies twice my size to make sure Darius never felt poor. When he wanted a car, I sold my wedding ring. When he wanted to start over after his divorce, I gave him my savings. I told myself that's what mothers do. We sacrifice. But sitting in that hospital bed, light flickering through half-closed blinds, something colder than anesthesia crept into me. If what Malik said was true, then my son hadn't just asked for my kidney. He had planned for my whole life to end on that table. A nurse walked in, startled to see my eyes open. "Mrs. Brooks, don't move. The doctor's coming. We stopped the procedure." I could barely form words. "Where's Malik?" "He's with Child Services right now. Everything's okay." "Where's my son?" She hesitated. "He's in another room with hospital security." I didn't ask another question. I just stared at the ceiling and let the tears slide into my hair. The ceiling tiles looked like snow I'd never touch again. Cold, unreachable, perfect from far away. You don't reach my age without learning that silence can say more than shouting ever will. As I lay there, I started to remember every small thing I'd brushed off these past months. How Darius always took my mail to help me sort it. How the insurance lady had called, asking if I really meant to change my beneficiary. How he'd rushed me through signing hospital forms without letting me read them. Back then, I told myself it was love, that he just wanted to handle things for me because he cared. But love doesn't hide paper trails or whisper lies through a child's ears. Hours later, Malik came to see me. His eyes were swollen, his voice trembling. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get Daddy in trouble. I just heard him on the phone." "What phone, baby?" "The one in the hallway. He was talking to a man. Said after your surgery, the insurance would clear and we'd never worry about bills again. He paused. He laughed when he said it, Grandma. He laughed. That laughter, imagined or real, cut through me like the scalpel that never touched my skin. I reached for his hand, small and shaking, and pressed it to my heart. You did right, Malik, I whispered. You saved your grandma today. He didn't understand all the weight in those words, but one day he would. Because the truth that boy carried into that room didn't just save my life. It shattered the illusion I'd been living under for years. And as I closed my eyes again, one thought burned clearer than any hospital light. If my son could plan my death to pay his debts, then the woman he thought he could control was about to show him what real survival looked like. When I was young, I used to believe love could fix anything. That belief was stitched into me by my mama, who raised 6 of us in a shotgun house with floors that creaked louder than our stomachs. She used to say, "Baby, love don't pay the bills, but it sure helps you survive them." Back then, I thought she was just talking about marriage. Took me nearly 70 years to learn she was talking about family, too. About the kind of love that'll keep you giving long after you should have stopped. My husband, Charles Brooks, was a tall, quiet man. The kind of man who could fix anything except his own heart. He died at 43. Sudden. Heart attack on a humid Georgia morning. One moment he was patching a leak in the roof. The next he was on the ground, rainwater pooling under his hand like the world was trying to wash him away. Darius was only 8. I remember him sitting on that front porch in his Spider-Man pajamas, staring at the ambulance lights, whispering, "Mama, he gone?" And I said the lie all mothers say when their own world just cracked in half. "He just restin', baby. God's taking care of him now." From that day on, I promised myself my boy would never feel unprotected again. That promise, that one small, trembling vow, turned into the chain that bound the rest of my life. We didn't have much, but I worked like I had everything to lose. By day, I cleaned hospital rooms and changed sheets. By night, I cleaned houses around Macon, the kind where the air smelled like candles you couldn't afford and the floors gleamed like guilt. I came home with aching feet and a paycheck too small to stretch. But when I saw Darius asleep on the couch with his school books open, all that pain turned to pride. He was a smart boy, sharp like his daddy, and people always said he'd go far. I believed them. Maybe too much. When he said he wanted new sneakers, I found extra shifts. When he said he wanted to go to college out of state, I cashed in my savings bonds. When he came home with a baby at 22 and a marriage that fell apart by 25, I said, "That's all right, baby. Mama got you." I was proud of being dependable. It made me feel needed. Made me feel like Charles hadn't left me completely alone. Looking back, I can see it now. The slow, gentle erosion of boundaries that comes disguised as love. It wasn't sudden. It was a drip. First, Darius stopped saying, "Thank you." Then he stopped asking altogether. The day he took my car without permission and returned it empty on gas, he just smiled and said, "You know I'll fill it up next time, Ma." There never was a next time. But I didn't say anything. I told myself he was stressed, working hard, trying to make ends meet. I told myself he was my son, my only son. And sons don't mean to hurt their mamas. They just forget how easy it is. There were good days, too. I don't ever want to make it sound like there weren't. He'd come over for Sunday dinner with Malik, and I'd fry catfish and bake cornbread the way Charles used to like. Darius would kiss my cheek and say, "Nobody cooks like you, Ma." And for a few hours, I'd believe it was still the 3 of us, me, him, and his daddy, before death and debt and disappointment had a chance to move in. Those dinners kept me blind longer than I'd like to admit. They were my proof that family was still whole. But love, I've learned, can be a dangerous anesthetic. It numbs you right through the damage. When Darius lost his job 3 years ago, he called, crying. "Ma, they let me go," said the company downsizing. "I got bills, I got Malik. I don't know what to do." And before I could even think, I said, "You come stay here, baby, till you get back on your feet." That till turned into 3 years of quiet bleeding. He never left. He used my address for his mail, my fridge for his groceries, and my credit for his mistakes. But I told myself it was temporary. That mothers don't turn away their own flesh. If anyone else had treated me that way, I'd have called it theft. But when it's your child, it feels like duty. When the doctor said Darius's kidneys were failing, I didn't hesitate. I didn't even let him finish explaining before I said, "Test me." I remember the look on Darius's face, relief mixed with something I couldn't quite name. Maybe guilt, maybe greed. It was gone too quick to tell. I told everyone at church, the Lord matched us for a reason. He gave me 2 kidneys so I could share one. I believed it, truly did. Faith can make fools of good people. That night, before my first round of tests, I sat on the edge of my bed and talked to Charles's photograph. "They say love covers a multitude of sins," I whispered, "but I think sometimes it just hides them." The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the hum of the old fridge. I remember thinking how proud Charles would have been to see me saving our boy. Now I wonder if he'd have been proud or heartbroken. They say hindsight's 20/20, but it's more like 20 years late. The signs were always there. The missing bank letters, the forged signature on the loan I co-signed, the way Darius flinched when Malik asked too many questions. But love kept me blind and guilt kept me quiet. Because when you've spent decades saving someone, it's hard to admit they're the reason you need saving now. And if I'd known what was truly waiting beneath that hospital light, if I'd known what my son had planned, I might have prayed for God to take me before the knife ever did. It started one Sunday morning in late spring, the kind of morning that smelled like rain and magnolias. I just pulled a peach cobbler from the oven when I heard the crash. Darius was in the kitchen doorway, pale as a ghost, gripping the counter like the earth was tilting under him. "Ma!" he gasped. "I can't breathe." The dish fell from my hands and shattered across the floor. By the time I got to him, his eyes had rolled back and his knees buckled. Malik screamed from the living room. I remember the way his small hands trembled against my arm as we waited for the ambulance. At the hospital, I sat beside his bed for hours, my old hands wrapped around his younger ones, whispering every prayer I knew. When the doctor finally walked in, I stood before he even spoke. "Mrs. Brooks," he said gently, "your son's kidneys are failing. He's in stage 4 renal failure." The words felt like bullets wrapped in sympathy. I'd heard those words before, in my years cleaning hospital rooms, in other mothers' mouths, but never thought they'd come for me. "Is he gonna make it?" The doctor sighed. "With dialysis, maybe, but he'll need a transplant soon." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every tick of the clock felt like a countdown. Every sound in the house, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the stairs, whispered one question: what if he dies? 2 weeks later, they called. The doctor said they'd found several potential donors, but none were close matches. So I asked what any mother would. "What about me?" He hesitated, professional but cautious. "Mrs. Brooks, you're 68. There are risks." "I didn't ask about the risks, baby. I asked if I could." He nodded. "We'll test you." That was all I needed. By the time I left that office, I'd already made up my mind. When I told Darius, he stared at me for a long second, eyes wide, then glistening. "Ma, you'd really do that for me?" "Of course. You, my child." He looked away, jaw tightening, voice dropping lower. "You always been my angel." Those words made my heart ache in the sweetest way, but behind them, I caught something else. A kind of calculation, a shadow that flickered across his face like a thought he didn't want me to see. I brushed it off, because when your baby looks grateful, you don't study the shadow behind the gratitude. The next few weeks blurred into hospital visits and forms. The nurses knew me by name. "Ms. Brooks, you're such a blessing," they'd say as I rolled up my sleeve for another blood draw. I'd smile and whisper, "Just doing what a mama's supposed to." But the paperwork started to worry me. There were pages I didn't understand. Words like liability, coverage, authorization for post-operative release of estate documentation. "Darius," I said one afternoon, "these papers talk about insurance. Why they need all that?" He was sitting on the edge of my bed, looking tired but sharp in that way he always did when money was involved. "Ma, that's just hospital language. They want to make sure bills are paid if something goes wrong." "Something go wrong?" I asked. He laughed, too fast, too loud. "I mean, you'll be fine. You always are. Just sign it so we can move forward." I signed. Because that's what love looked like to me, trust written in ink. Malik started noticing things I didn't. He was just a 10-year-old boy, but sometimes children see truth through the cracks adults refuse to look at. He'd say, "Grandma, Daddy always whispering when you sleep. He talking about money again." I'd hush him. Baby grown folks got grown problems. But that night, I couldn't shake the image. My son standing in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, voice low, face turned away. The next dialysis appointment broke me. Watching my son hooked up to those machines, his skin gray, his body shaking, it tore at every fiber of my being. The nurse said he was losing strength fast, that a transplant would be his only real chance. Darius squeezed my hand and whispered, "You the only one who can save me, Ma." It wasn't a plea, it was a statement. Calm, confident, and final. Something about the way he said it chilled me, like he already knew what I'd answer. Church folks came by that week to pray for me. Sister Lorraine clasped my hand and said, "Evelyn, don't let guilt trick you into playing God." I smiled, but inside I thought, I ain't playing God, I'm just being a mother. That's the lie I held close, the one that kept me moving through the fear. But every night, when I lay in bed, I'd hear Charles's voice in my mind. "Evie, sometimes love can turn into worship, and worship'll make you blind." I'd wake up sweating, whispering, "He's just sick, Charles. He ain't evil." But even saying it out loud didn't sound convincing anymore. The day before the surgery was scheduled, Darius brought home a big folder. "Hospital stuff," he said, laying it on my kitchen table. "You just need to initial a few more things." The folder was thick, stapled, some pages folded. I glanced through and saw one paper titled, "Amendment to Insurance Beneficiary." "Why this in here?" I asked. He didn't blink. "It's just so they can contact me if there's complications." That word again, complications. It hung in the air like humidity before a storm. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Don't you worry, Ma. After this, everything's gonna be all right." Then he turned away too quickly, like a man hiding a grin after a lie. That night, I ironed my church dress, the one I'd wear home from recovery. I sat at my vanity and brushed my hair until it shined silver under the lamp, whispering prayers I half believed. If anyone had told me that by the next morning I'd be lying in a hospital gown, seconds from anesthesia, and my grandson would be screaming the truth that would save my life, I would have told them they were crazy. Because the hardest truth about love is this: the people we're most willing to die for are often the ones most willing to let us. After Darius's diagnosis, the house changed. Not loud at first, just little things, like the air felt heavier. He started treating my home like a hospital command post. Bills, letters, and folders stacked high on my dining table. Phone calls at odd hours, whispered in the hallway with doors half closed. And when I'd ask who was on the line, he'd say, "Just insurance, Ma. Grown folks stuff." That phrase again. Grown folks stuff. The same thing I'd told Malik when he asked questions. I didn't realize how easily the lie travels down the family tree. Every Wednesday, Malik came after school and did his homework at my kitchen counter. He was a quiet boy, polite and curious, with eyes too sharp for 10. One afternoon, he tugged on my sleeve while I was mixing cornbread. "Grandma, Daddy said not to open your mail no more. He said he gonna take care of it. I froze mid-stir. He said what? Yeah, he said it's stressing you out. I forced a smile. That's nice of him, baby. But something in my chest shifted. A small warning ripple like thunder too far to see. A few days later, I found one of those letters he'd handled. It was from my bank. A change of address notice I didn't make. When I asked Darius about it, he laughed, easy as butter melting in a pan. Relax, Ma. I just had him forward some statements to me so I can help keep track. You shouldn't worry about paperwork while you recover. Recover. That word made it sound like the surgery had already happened, like my decision was no longer mine. That night, I called my sister, Loretta, up in Atlanta. She's the kind who keeps her voice steady even when the world ain't. Loretta, you ever get a feeling that something's wrong but you can't prove it? She sighed. You talking about Darius? I hesitated, then whispered, he just actin' different. Baby, that boy been different. You just finally seeing it clear. Don't start, I said, trying to keep peace, but she didn't stop. Evie, love don't mean you gotta be blind. Charles spoiled him, and you finished the job. That man know exactly how to play you. I hung up polite, but her words stuck to me like burrs on church clothes. Sunday came, and I tried to shake the heaviness. I put on my best hat, pressed my skirt, and walked to church with Malik. The choir sang, "His eye is on the sparrow," and for a moment I felt steady again. After service, Sister Turner, our church mother, pulled me aside near the fellowship hall. "Evelyn Brooks," she said, "you sure you letting the Lord lead and not guilt?" I smiled the way Southern women do when they don't want to answer. She leaned closer. That boy don't come around unless he needs something. I seen the look in his eyes. Same look my nephew had right before he sold my car out from under me. I chuckled, tried to brush it off. You know how young men are. But she just patted my hand. Uh-huh. That's what I said, right before mine took my retirement. That evening, Darius showed up with flowers and my favorite peach tea. "Ma, I've been thinking. Maybe you should sign a few more papers before surgery, just hospital formalities." He slid a manila envelope toward me, smiling like a salesman. I glanced at the first page. Power of attorney. My chest tightened. "What's this for?" He laughed too quick. "Just in case, Ma, you know, in case you can't sign stuff after the operation. Temporary thing. Why, it got my signature space on every page. Standard form. You trust me, don't you?" It wasn't the question that hurt. It was how easily he said it, like he already knew the answer. And of course, I gave it. Of course, baby. I didn't sign that night, though. I said I'd pray on it. And when he left, his smile cracked just a little, like a man whose plan hit a small delay. Later, while washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the window, the porch light behind me, the shadows stretching long. My hands were wrinkled, spotted, but still strong. And I thought, when did I become afraid of my own child? I whispered a prayer I'd never prayed before. Lord, if I'm wrong about my boy, forgive me. But if I'm right, don't let me find out too late. The next morning, Malik waited at the bus stop with his backpack open. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Daddy left this in your mail pile." It was an insurance brochure, circled in red pen, words underlined. Full payout upon donor death during surgery. I felt my knees weaken, the edges of the paper blurred. Malik looked up at me, eyes wide. "Is it bad?" I forced a shaky smile. "No, baby. Grandma just need a minute." When the bus pulled away, I stood there holding that paper like a confession I wasn't ready to read aloud. That night, I confronted Darius. Softly, careful. "Baby, why I find something in my mail talking about donor death benefits?" He didn't even blink. "You read too much into things, Ma. They print those for everybody." "But why it got my policy number on it?" He set his fork down slow. "Because I handle your finances, remember? You told me to." He smiled then. the kind of smile that says, "I got you cornered and you don't even know it." For the first time in my life, I couldn't finish supper. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I sat in my chair till sunrise, staring at the folder he'd left on the table. Part of me wanted to tear it open. The other part, the mother part, was too scared to prove what my gut already knew. When dawn crept through the curtains, I finally whispered to the empty room, "Lord, please tell me my boy ain't the reason I feel like prey in my own house." But heaven stayed silent. Only the refrigerator hummed its steady, cold song, like it knew something I didn't, and somewhere deep inside me, a truth began to stir. A quiet, heavy truth that no amount of love could bury for long. The night before the surgery, the house felt too still, like even the walls were holding their breath. I had laid out everything I'd need for the hospital: my Bible, my reading glasses, the blue nightgown Malik bought me for Christmas, and the silk scarf Charles gave me the year before he died. It was my small way of pretending I was in control. I'd cooked dinner early, chicken stew soft enough for Darius's fragile appetite. But he didn't touch much of it. He just picked at the food, scrolling on his phone, smiling every few minutes at something he wouldn't show me. "Everything okay, baby?" I asked. "Yeah, Ma," he said without looking up, "just handling details for tomorrow." Something in the way he said details made my stomach tighten, but I swallowed the worry like I'd done 1,000 times before. After Malik went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table filling out a few last-minute hospital forms. The clock ticked too loud in that old house, marking every second closer to sunrise. "You should get some sleep, Ma," Darius said from the doorway. His voice was too soft, like he'd practiced the tone. "I will, just making sure everything's ready." He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, smiling faintly. "You nervous?" "More thankful than nervous," I said. "God blessed me enough to be able to help you." He smiled, but there was something off about it, like the corners of his mouth didn't quite match the look in his eyes. "Yeah," he murmured, "you always been my miracle." I wanted to believe he meant that out of love. I really did. But when he turned to go, I caught him glancing toward the hallway, toward my bedroom, with a strange look, half calculation, half curiosity, like a man checking a clock only he could see. I stayed at the table long after he went upstairs. The air smelled faintly of bleach and worry. When I finally rose, I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, the same one where I'd prayed through every storm of my life. My knees ached, my heart raced, but my mind wouldn't still. So I opened my Bible, flipping to Proverbs, the one verse that always steadied me. "The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her. She doeth him good and not evil all the days of her life." But that night, those words twisted. I whispered to the empty room, "And what if the one you love ain't trustworthy at all?" I began to write a letter, a small, shaky note for Malek. "If something happens to me, baby, don't you blame yourself. Grandma did what she thought was right. Always remember, love without truth can kill faster than sickness." I folded the note, tucked it inside my Bible, and prayed I'd never need him to read it. Around midnight, I heard voices. At first, I thought it was the TV, but then I recognized Darius's. Low, sharp, deliberate. I slipped my feet into my slippers and crept toward the hallway. The sound came from near the front door. He was on the phone. "I told you," he hissed. "She's going under tomorrow morning. Once she's sedated, the papers are valid. The insurance clears in 48 hours. My heart seized. There was a long pause, then his voice again, colder now. "No, she don't know nothin'. The old lady still think this is about savin' me." He chuckled. That sound I'll never forget. Soft, easy, cruel. "Yeah, by this time tomorrow, everything gonna be ours." I pressed a hand over my mouth. My legs trembled. Every word felt like a cut, deep and slow. He hung up, and I barely made it back to my room without collapsing. I sat there in the dark, the world spinning around me, whispering to God, "Please tell me I heard that wrong." But deep down, I knew I hadn't. Minutes turned into hours. I thought about calling Loretta, but what would I even say? My son's planning to kill me for an insurance payout? No one would believe that. Not about Darius, the smiling church boy, the loving son. I thought about confronting him right then, but fear paralyzed me. Not the kind that comes from danger. The kind that comes from heartbreak. Because once you speak a truth like that out loud, there's no going back to the world where you still believe your child loves you. The house creaked with every breath. At 2:15 a.m., Malik padded quietly into my room, rubbing his eyes. "Grandma, I can't sleep." "Come here, baby," I said, patting the bed beside me. He crawled in, head resting on my shoulder. "You scared?" "Little bit," I admitted, "but I got my angel right here." He hesitated, then whispered, "Grandma, I heard Daddy talking on the phone." My heart clenched. "What did you hear, sweetheart?" "He said something about you not waking up. He said everything gonna be better after." He looked up at me, eyes glossy with confusion. "Is that bad?" I swallowed the tears burning at the back of my throat. "You just tell me what you heard, baby. You did nothing wrong." He nodded, pressing his face into my arm. "I don't want you to go." I stroked his hair, whispering, "Neither do I." After he fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling until dawn. The sky outside shifted from black to gray to gold. Birds started singing, loud and unbothered, like they hadn't heard a mother's world fall apart. When the knock on the door came at 7:00 a.m., the hospital transport arriving right on time, I moved like a ghost through the motions, dressed, packed, prayed. Darius acted like nothing had happened. He held my coat, smiled at the driver, and said, "We ready." But as I walked out that door, I slipped Malik's note into the front pocket of my purse, because if what I feared was true, I wanted the world to know. My grandson knew the truth first, and maybe, just maybe, that truth would be the only thing standing between my death and my justice. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and endings. Everything was too white. The walls, the sheets, the uniforms, like the world had been bleached of truth. The nurse smiled as she tightened the strap around my arm. "You're in good hands, Ms. Brooks." I wanted to believe her. I smiled back, but my lips felt dry. Darius stood at the foot of the bed, hands clasped like a man in prayer. "Everything's gonna be okay, Ma," he said softly. He leaned in, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "You'll finally get to rest." Something about that word rest chilled me, but I didn't flinch. I just closed my eyes and prayed, "Lord, if I don't wake up, please don't let Malik blame himself." They wheeled me down the hall, past rows of closed doors and blinking monitors. My hands trembled beneath the blanket, but I kept still. I didn't want anyone to see fear on my face. The anesthesiologist's voice was calm, steady. "You're brave, Ms. Brooks. Just a little pinch and you'll be asleep in seconds." He slid the needle into the line. The cold burn of the medicine crept up my arm like frost. My last thought before closing my eyes was Malik's voice whispering, "He said you're not supposed to wake up." The doors burst open. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, that maybe the drugs had pulled me into a dream. But then came the sound, a child's scream slicing through sterile air. "Grandma, stop! Please don't do it!" Everything stopped at once. The beeping monitors, the murmuring doctors, the rhythm of the room. Someone shouted, "Who let this child in here?" Another voice, sharp, panicked, "Get him out!" Through the blur, I saw Malik, my sweet boy, standing in the doorway, hair tousled, hospital slippers slapping the floor. His face was red, wet with tears. "Grandma," he sobbed, "Dad said you're not supposed to wake up after this. He said it's going to be hours when you gone." The whole room froze. The surgeon's hand stopped mid-air. The anesthesiologist cursed under his breath and pulled the IV from my arm. I tried to lift my head, but the medicine had already made my body heavy. My mouth wouldn't work right. All I could manage was a whisper. "What did he say?" Darius's voice cracked across the room like a whip. "Malik, stop! What are you doing?" He rushed forward, but a nurse grabbed his arm. Malik clung to the bed rail, sobbing. "Don't let him, Grandma! Don't let him hurt you!" The room erupted. Alarms beeping, nurses shouting, a doctor calling for security. Someone turned off the overhead lights, another hit a code on the wall. And in that chaos, I saw my son's face. Not the boy I raised, not the man I prayed for, but a stranger with my husband's eyes and a devil's calm. "Get him out!" Darius shouted again, but this time his voice wasn't scared. It was furious, like a plan unraveling in front of witnesses. The anesthesiologist moved fast. "Cancel procedure. Remove patient from prep." A nurse wheeled me toward recovery, her hands shaking. "It's okay, Ms. Brooks," she said, breathless. "You're safe. You didn't go under." I wanted to answer her, to say, "I know I'm not safe," but my lips refused to move. All I could do was look toward Malik, still crying, still reaching, before the doors closed between us. When I came to, I was in a dim hospital room with a nurse sitting at my side. "You're okay, ma'am," she said softly. "The surgery didn't happen." My throat burned when I tried to speak. "Where's my grandson?" "He's fine. He's with Child Protective Staff right now." "And my son?" The nurse hesitated. "Security's talking to him. There were inconsistencies with his paperwork." That word, inconsistencies, carried a quiet kind of horror. A hospital administrator came in next, tall, gray suit, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Brooks," he said carefully, "we had reason to pause the procedure due to an urgent statement from your grandson. We've contacted the hospital's legal department and our ethics board. Do you have a moment to answer some questions?" My throat tightened. "Ask what you need." He glanced at the file. "Your insurance policy was recently updated. Did you authorize this change?" "What change?" "Your life insurance now lists your son, Darius Brooks, as the sole beneficiary in case of donor death during transplant." My body went cold. "No," I whispered. "I ain't signed nothing like that." The administrator exchanged a grim look with the nurse. "That's what we feared." They asked more questions. When I last signed documents, who handled my mail, whether anyone else had access to my identification. By the end, my voice was trembling so hard I could barely speak. The nurse handed me a cup of water, but it tasted like dust. When they left, the room fell quiet again. I lay there staring at the ceiling, watching the fluorescent light flicker like a heartbeat that refused to settle. A tear slid down my cheek, and I whispered, "Charles, baby." Our boy tried to kill me. The silence that followed was heavier than grief. It was shame, guilt, disbelief, all twisted together into something sharp. Hours later, Malik came in. He ran to my bedside before anyone could stop him. "Grandma, I didn't mean to make trouble," he cried. I cupped his face, tears blurring my vision. "You didn't make trouble, baby. You told the truth." He sniffled. "They said Daddy can't come in no more." "That's all right." My voice broke. Sometimes God gotta close the door on the devil himself. He didn't understand all of it, but he held my hand and whispered, "I heard you crying in your sleep. I didn't want you to get hurt." I brushed his hair back and kissed his forehead. "You did good, Malik. You saved your grandma's life." He looked up at me, eyes wide and full of something I hadn't seen in a long time. Pure, innocent courage. And as I watched him, I realized something deep in my bones. If my son could plan my death for money, then the bloodline I once thought cursed had been redeemed by a 10-year-old boy with truth in his voice and no shame in his soul. The next morning, I woke to the sound of whispers outside my hospital door. Lawyers, administrators, nurses, voices blurred by confusion and shame. Every now and then, I caught a word that twisted my stomach tighter. Fraud. Forged. Liability. Investigation. The nurse from the night before, a kind woman named Rosa, came in carrying a folder against her chest like it weighed something heavy. "Mrs. Brooks," she said softly, "we're still trying to sort through some things, but it's important you see this." She opened the folder and laid down a few documents, copies of forms with my name scrawled across the bottom, except it wasn't my handwriting, not the curves of my E's, not the slope of my B's. This ain't mine." She nodded. "We know. Our legal department confirmed that several forms were altered after your initial signature, including the life insurance addendum." I swallowed hard. "So it's true then. My own son forged my name." Rosa hesitated. "I'm afraid so, and the hospital's policy requires us to notify law enforcement." For a moment the world went quiet, like every sound got sucked out of the air. Then came the tears, hot and uninvited, sliding down my cheeks. Not for myself, for the little boy who used to sleep on my lap during thunderstorms, for the man who once promised he'd take care of me when I was old. Detective Samuels came by that afternoon, tall, kind-eyed, professional but human. He spoke gently, but every word made my chest ache more. "Mrs. Brooks, your son's been taken into temporary custody while we review the documents and his communication records. It appears he coordinated this plan over several weeks." "Plan?" The word came out brittle. He nodded grimly. "Evidence shows he contacted your insurance provider and modified beneficiary information using falsified consent forms. There are also recorded calls with a financial advisor discussing potential payouts in case of your post-surgical death." I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth. It felt surreal, like I was floating above my own life, watching it crumble piece by piece. Loretta arrived later that day, her face drawn tight with fury. She sat beside my bed, eyes glistening but dry. "I told you that boy was trouble," she said, voice trembling. I shook my head weakly. "Don't say I told you so, Loretta. Not today." She sighed, took my hand. "I won't. But you gotta listen now. This ain't just about forgiveness no more. It's about survival." Her words hit deep, because until that moment, I'd been mourning, not fighting. Over the next 2 days, the investigation peeled back every layer of Darius's life I'd been too blind to see. He wasn't just broke. He was drowning. He'd taken loans under my name, maxed out credit cards I didn't know existed, and even pawned Charles's watch, the only thing I'd kept of my husband's. There were emails, phone calls, and payment schedules that painted a picture so cruel it almost didn't seem real. He'd planned everything: the timing, the surgery, the false paperwork. He'd even transferred my property deed into a joint caretaker account without my knowledge, set to revert fully to him upon my unavailability. I remember whispering, "Unavailability? That's what they call death now?" Detective Samuels lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am." That night, I couldn't eat. Food tasted like lies. I sat by the window of my hospital room, watching the streetlights blink through the rain. Every drop hitting the glass felt like God tapping, reminding me that he'd shown me mercy, even when my own blood had none. Malik came in quietly, carrying a small paper crane he'd folded from a hospital menu. "I made this for you, Grandma," he said shyly. I smiled, took it gently. "What's it for, baby?" "It means you can't break easy." I stared at that little bird in my hand, fragile yet folded into something stronger, and I thought, if a child can make strength out of paper, maybe I can make it out of pain. By the 3rd day, hospital administration cleared me for discharge. Rosa hugged me before I left. "You're one strong woman, Mrs. Brooks." I smiled faintly. "Strength ain't what I wanted, baby. I just wanted my son." Loretta helped me into her car. The sky was overcast, heavy like my heart. As we pulled away, I glanced back at the hospital doors, wide glass doors that had seen life, death, and rebirth. I realized I was leaving a different woman than the one who came in. That Evelyn had been willing to die for love. This one had learned how to live without it. At home, the house felt foreign, too clean, too quiet, too empty. Darius's shoes were still by the door, his mug on the counter. I picked it up, stared at the ring of coffee at the bottom, and whispered, "You almost buried me with this cup still warm." The weight of betrayal sank deeper than grief, but beneath it, a fire started. Slow, steady, determined. I wasn't just going to cry about what he did. I was going to make sure he never did it again. To anyone. Grief changes you in ways you can't explain. It's not the crying that hurts. It's the silence afterward when you realize the person you loved most was the one who tried to destroy you. For 2 days, I barely spoke. Loretta cooked, Malik stayed close, and the house sat under a hush, like a church after a funeral. I'd sit by the window looking out at the magnolia tree Charles planted and wonder if God made it bloom each spring just to prove life can still come from broken ground. But no matter how I tried to pray the hurt away, anger kept coming back. Not wild, not screaming, but calm and clean, like something righteous. A mother's grief had turned into a woman's rage, and I knew it was time to stop crying and start acting. Detective Samuels came by again, this time with an update. "Your son's refusing to cooperate," he said, "but we've recovered text messages suggesting he discussed the plan with another party, possibly a financial broker." "Lord, have mercy," I muttered. He wasn't just greedy, he was organized. Samuels nodded. "We'll need your testimony to press full charges. Forgery, attempted insurance fraud, and potential elder endangerment." I met his eyes and said something I never thought I would about my own child. "Do what you need to do, detective. I carried him into this world, but I won't carry his sin out of it." After he left, I sat at the kitchen table with Malik coloring beside me. He looked up and said, "Grandma, are you mad at Daddy?" I thought about lying, but lies had already cost us enough. "I'm sad, baby," I said softly. "Sad that Daddy forgot what love is supposed to mean." He nodded, quietly drawing a picture of a heart split in half, taped back together. I wanted to tell him everything would be okay, but I didn't know what okay meant anymore. That night, I went through my paperwork, every drawer, every file, every receipt. Loretta helped, reading glasses perched on her nose. By 10 p.m., we'd found more evidence. 2 credit accounts in my name, opened in the last year. "He used your Social Security, Evie," she whispered, disgusted. "Ain't nothing sacred no more." I took a deep breath, exhaled slow. Then I guess I better teach him the one thing he forgot: consequences. The next morning, I called a lawyer, Mr. Harris, an old friend from church. He came by, legal pad in hand, expression sober. "Evelyn," he said gently, "we can file both civil and criminal claims. You'll have to revoke all powers of attorney, freeze your credit, and place a fraud alert on your accounts." "I'm ready," I said, my voice calm. He studied me a moment. "You sure you want to go through with this? He's still your son." I looked out the window at the magnolia tree swaying in the wind. Son or not, he tried to bury me before my time. I ain't letting him plant nobody else. After Harris left, I sat at the piano Charles had bought me on our 10th anniversary. My fingers hadn't touched it in years, but they found the keys again, slow, trembling. I played "His Eye is on the Sparrow," the same hymn Sister Turner sang at church the week before all this began. This time, the words didn't sound like comfort. They sounded like a vow. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. My voice cracked, but I kept singing, because for the first time in a long while, I understood freedom. And it wasn't something anyone gave me. I took it back. 2 days later, a hospital lawyer called. "Mrs. Brooks, we've confirmed full forgery. On multiple documents, the board intends to press charges. We're also referring the case to state authorities." "Thank you," I said. "Do what you need." After she hung up, I sat in silence. For a moment, I almost pitied Darius. Almost. Then I remembered that laughter I'd heard through the phone the night before surgery. His voice dripping with greed. And whatever pity tried to bloom turned to stone. That evening, Malik crawled into my lap, his little hands holding my face. "Grandma," he whispered, "you still love Daddy?" I kissed his forehead. I'll always love the boy I raised, but the man he became, I don't know him no more. He frowned. Will he say sorry? Maybe one day, I said, but we don't wait on sorry to start healing. He thought about that, then nodded like he'd just learned something sacred. When Malik went to bed, I poured myself a cup of tea and looked at the stars through the kitchen window. For the first time in years, I didn't pray for Darius to change. I prayed for the strength to stop waiting for him to, because forgiveness without wisdom is just another way to bleed, and I was done bleeding. They brought him in wearing handcuffs. Even with his wrists bound, Darius walked like he still owned the room. That same cocky slouch, the half-smile that used to melt me as a mother now curdled my blood. We were in a small interview room at the county detention center, pale green walls, one buzzing light, and a metal table that separated us like a border between two worlds. He sat down, eyes avoiding mine at first. Then, when the guard left us alone, he leaned back and smiled. "Guess you happy now, huh? Got your boy locked up." I folded my hands. My voice was steady. Too steady. "No, Darius, I ain't happy. But I'm awake." He scoffed, shaking his head. "You always been dramatic, Ma. You know I was never going to let nothing happen to you." "You forged my name," I said, flat and low. "You tried to cash in on my death." He leaned forward, the smirk faltering just a bit. "You don't know the full story." I nodded slowly. "Then tell me, baby, what story got a son almost killing his mama in it?" He sighed, rubbing his face with his shackled hands. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I was drowning. Debt collectors call in every day. The company I worked for, they sued me for breach of contract. I thought if I could just get a head start, I could pay it all off." "So you figured you'd start over with my life insurance money?" His eyes flashed, defensive. "You was gonna die someday anyway, Ma. Least it could have gone to help me and Malik." That sentence, "you was gonna die someday anyway," hit me like a slap that never ended. I sat back, studying him. The same face I once kissed goodnight, the same eyes that used to look for me in crowds, now hollow as a grave. "You listen to yourself, Darius?" I whispered. "I carried you for 9 months, raised you 30-some years after that, and you talking like my life's pocket change?" He exhaled, loud, frustrated. "You just don't get it. You always been stubborn. You had everything. The house, the savings, the sympathy. I got nothing. You never helped me when I really needed it." I laughed. Not out of humor, but out of heartbreak. "Everything you got came from me. You wore shoes I worked night shifts for. You slept under roofs I scrubbed floors to pay for. You call that nothing?" He slammed his hands on the table, the cuffs clinking. "You don't know what it's like to be me." I stood then, slow, deliberate, eyes never leaving his. "I don't need to know. I know what it's like to be me, a woman who gave her life for a son who tried to sell it back." He looked away, jaw tight. "You actin' like you some saint." "I ain't no saint," I said, "but I'm done being your victim." The guard opened the door, signaling time was up. I turned to leave, but then I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. Without turning back, I said quietly, "You wanted my death to buy your freedom, but the day I lived, that's when you lost yours." The silence behind me was heavy. When I glanced back once, just before stepping out, I saw tears threatening his eyes, not from guilt, but from fear, the same fear all liars face when their lies run out. Outside, Loretta waited in the hall. Her hand found mine. "You all right, Evie?" "I'm fine," I said. "He ain't my problem no more. Justice is." That evening, I sat at home with Malik curled against me, watching cartoons, his laughter bubbling like music after a funeral. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled for real, small, quiet, but honest. Because I realized something. I'd spent my whole life teaching Darius right from wrong, but God had just shown Malik what truth looks like when it stands on its own 2 feet. Courtrooms have their own kind of silence, not peaceful, not holy, but tense, like the heirs waiting to see who will break first. When I walked in, people turned to look. A few whispered. The prosecutor had told me I didn't have to be there every day, but I wanted to. After all the lies, I needed to hear the truth said out loud in a room that swore to honor it. Darius sat at the defense table, looking smaller than I remembered, still dressed nice, still pretending, but the arrogance was gone. His lawyer kept whispering in his ear. He didn't look at me once. The district attorney stood first, voice firm and clear. Your Honor, this case isn't about financial desperation. It's about deliberate deception. A son exploiting his mother's love to stage her death for profit. My name came up often. Evelyn Brooks, age 68, retired nurse's aide, intended organ donor and victim of attempted insurance. Fraud. Hearing the words victim and mother in the same sentence felt strange, like 2 worlds colliding inside me. The defense tried to twist it, of course. Mr. Brooks was under extreme emotional distress, the lawyer said. His actions, while misguided, stemmed from panic and pressure. The judge leaned forward. Forging your mother's signature, doctoring hospital records, and lying to her about her own life insurance policy, that's not panic. That's premeditated. For the first time, I saw Darius's mask crack. His jaw clenched, his leg bounced. When it was my turn to testify, my knees trembled. But my voice didn't. The bailiff swore me in, and I looked straight at my son. I loved that boy more than I loved myself, I said into the microphone. Gasps rustled through the room, maybe at the word boy, maybe at the past tense. I gave him everything I had, but love without truth don't heal. It feeds the sickness. I ignored the signs because no mother wants to believe her child capable of evil. But ignoring the truth almost killed me, and I thank God it didn't. I took a deep breath, steadying my hands. He didn't just forge my name. He tried to bury it, but I'm still here, and I'm saying my own name now. The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of pens. The judge looked at me, then at Darius. You raised a strong woman, Mr. Brooks. It's a shame you forgot what strength looks like. After closing arguments, the verdict came quicker than anyone expected. Guilty on all counts. Forgery, attempted insurance fraud, elder endangerment, sentenced to 12 years in state prison. The sound of the gavel hit like thunder after a long storm. Darius didn't look up at me. He just stared at the table, his face pale, his mouth tight. The same expression he had the day he lost his first job. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him again. Almost. But then I remembered the phone call, the laugh, the papers with my forged name, and pity dried up faster than tears ever could. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I didn't stop for interviews, but one young woman approached me gently. Mrs. Brooks, she said, what do you want people to learn from your story? I paused, looked into her camera, and answered plain. That trust is a gift, not a guarantee. And when someone breaks it, you don't have to break yourself trying to fix them. Her eyes softened. You're incredibly strong. I smiled faintly. Strength's just what pain looks like when it finally stands up. That evening, when Malik and I returned home, the house felt different, lighter, freer. He handed me a folded piece of paper, a drawing he made while I was gone. It was me, him, and a big sun behind us. He'd written in his shaky letters, "We safe now, Grandma." I framed that drawing and set it on the mantel right next to Charles's photo. Because for the first time in a long while, I believed it. We were safe. And though the world still held its share of darkness, I knew one thing for sure. As long as I breathed, that boy, my sweet Malik, would never grow up thinking love and lies were the same thing. When the cell door closed behind my son, it was like a chapter of my life sealed shut with it. There wasn't triumph in it. No joy, no victory, just silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like a church after everyone's gone home. For days, I moved through the house like a ghost. Every room still carried him. The dent on the couch cushion, the mug with his initials, the faint smell of his cologne in the hallway. I wanted to hate everything he'd touched, but hate's a poison that tastes like power and burns like grief. I'd had enough of burning. Loretta stayed a few nights. She cooked, cleaned, kept me company even when I said I was fine. Fine became my favorite lie, but she knew better. "You ain't gotta be strong all the time, Evie," she said one morning while making grits. "Sometimes healing means falling apart." I smiled at her, eyes misty. "You fall apart too long, people start calling it weakness." She shook her head. "No, baby, that's what they call honesty." The church found out, of course. News travels faster than grace. At first, I dreaded showing my face. But the following Sunday, I put on my best hat, straightened my shoulders, and walked through those double doors like I belonged. Because I did. When I stepped into that sanctuary, Sister Turner was waiting. She hugged me tight, whispered, "You survived, and you did it with truth on your side." That's holy enough for me. When the choir started singing Total Praise, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Tears streamed down my face, not of pain this time, but release. Because somehow, after all the breaking, I was still standing. Malik sat beside me, little hands folded in prayer. He leaned close and whispered, "Grandma, Daddy's in trouble, but he can still say sorry, right?" I nodded slowly. "One day, maybe. But we can't wait on sorry to start living, baby." He nodded, thinking hard, as if he was storing those words somewhere safe. After service, the congregation gathered around us. Folks pressed my hand, slipped notes of encouragement into my palm, some even crying harder than I did. One woman said, "You gave so many years to that boy, but God gave them back to you through your grandson." That night, when I tucked Malik in, he looked up at me and said, "Grandma, I had a dream Daddy was sorry. You hugged him." I smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what forgiveness feels like, sweetheart. Not forgetting, just not hating anymore." Weeks passed, and I started breathing like a free woman again. I got my accounts fixed, the property deed returned in my name, and even the hospital sent a formal apology letter for their oversight. People kept asking me, "What you gonna do now, Ms. Brooks?" And every time I answered the same way, "Live." I started tending my garden again. Tomatoes, collards, a little patch of lavender by the fence. Malik helped water the plants after school, humming to himself while the sun dipped behind the trees. One evening, I found a small bird's nest tucked in the magnolia branches. Inside it, 2 baby robins chirped softly. I thought of that paper crane Malik had made for me in the hospital. The one he said, "Don't break easy." Maybe life had folded me the same way, bent, creased, nearly torn, but still standing. When fall came, Malik brought home a certificate from school for courage and honesty beyond his years. His teacher told me he'd written an essay titled "The Day I Saved My Grandma." He'd left out the ugly details, but he wrote about truth and bravery and love, and how sometimes telling the truth can feel like the scariest thing in the world. When I finished reading it, tears ran down my face, quiet but steady. He looked up, worried. "You mad?" "No, baby," I said softly. "These are happy tears. You told the world the truth, and that's something even grown folks struggle to do." He grinned, shy but proud. That night, I stood in my backyard under the stars, the cool wind brushing against my skin. I thought of Charles, of the years we'd built, the love we'd shared, and how even in death, He was still protecting me through the courage of our grandson. For the first time in months, I whispered to the night, "Thank you, Lord. You took what was meant to kill me and turned it into something holy." And as I walked back inside, I realized something I hadn't felt since the day before the hospital. Peace. End of section 11, 9 and 25 words. Section 12, the letter to Darius. 3 months after the verdict, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper and an old fountain pen. The air was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall and the rustle of magnolia leaves outside. I'd thought about writing this letter for weeks. Not for him, for me. I started with his name. Dear Darius. For a long time, I couldn't write another word, because the truth is, I didn't know who I was writing to. My son, or the ghost of the boy I used to love. Finally, I wrote, I used to believe love meant saying yes to everything. But now I know real love means saying no when yes will destroy you. You broke my heart in ways I didn't know were possible, but you also showed me something I'd forgotten, that I'm still alive. The pen trembled in my hand. When I stood in that courtroom, I wasn't there to punish you. I was there to save myself. You may spend years behind bars, but I'm not the one bound anymore. I hope one day you understand the difference between guilt and repentance. One keeps you chained, the other sets you free. I paused, the ink smudging under a single tear that fell. Malik's doing fine. He's growing strong, kind, and honest. Everything I prayed you'd be. He still asks about you. I tell him you're learning lessons life didn't teach you soon enough. I don't badmouth you because that's not my job. My job was to raise you, and I did the best I could. The rest was yours to carry. I stared at the last few lines for a long time. Then slowly, I wrote the part that hurt the most. I forgive you, Darius. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I won't let your sin keep living inside me. I release you to God now. You took my trust, my money, nearly my life, but you didn't take my soul. And that's where my freedom lives. When I finished, I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into an envelope. I didn't write his prison address on it, didn't put a stamp. Instead, I walked out back to the magnolia tree. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and gold, the sun dipping low like a blessing. I struck a match and held the corner of the envelope to the flame. The fire caught quick, curling the paper into ash. The smoke rose, carrying my words into the evening air. Goodbye, baby, I whispered, watching it fade. You can't hurt me no more. When I came back inside, Malik was at the piano pressing random keys. He looked up, grinning. Grandma, I made a song. Play it for me, I said. It was messy and beautiful, little bursts of notes that didn't quite fit together but somehow made sense. When he finished, he said, That's what happy sounds like. I smiled, pulling him close. Then keep playing, baby. Keep playing till the world hears it. That night, before bed, I opened my Bible to the note I'd written him before surgery, the one that started with, If something happens to me. I smiled through tears, folded it closed, and whispered, Something did happen to me. I lived. The morning the first letter from the prison arrived, I didn't open it. I held it for a while, the paper trembling in my hands, then set it aside by the window where the sun spilled through the lace curtains. Maybe one day I'd read it. But not today. Today was for peace. Malik was outside chasing the neighborhood dog, his laughter echoing across the yard. I watched him through the glass, the golden light warming his curls. He'd grown taller these past months, braver too. Innocence sharpened by truth, but not destroyed by it. I brewed a cup of tea, the scent of jasmine curling through the kitchen. For once, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt lived in, earned. I stepped onto the porch, wrapped in my shawl, and let the sunlight touch my face. Somewhere far away, Darius was facing his time. But here was life. Here was love that didn't ask for proof, didn't take advantage of kindness. I whispered to the morning air, Thank you for letting me see another sunrise. Thank you for turning pain into wisdom." And as the breeze stirred the magnolia branches, I realized forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was remembering without bleeding. Malik ran up the steps, grinning, breathless. "Grandma, look what I found!" In his hands was a small feather, soft, white, weightless. "Must have fallen from the sky," he said. I smiled, touched his cheek. "Maybe it's an angel reminding us we're still watched over." He slipped the feather into my palm. "Then you keep it, Grandma. You need it more." I laughed, pulled him close, and looked toward the rising sun. The world wasn't perfect, but it was mine again, and that, after everything, was enough.